The medieval tavern was far removed from the polished depictions found in fantasy films, serving instead as a refuge shaped by exhaustion, hunger, and constant uncertainty. For laborers who toiled from sunrise to dusk, these smoky and crowded gathering spaces provided brief relief from the harsh demands of work and survival. The dim light of tallow candles revealed faces lined with fatigue, where conversation and drink masked the anxieties of people living without financial security. Here, a single coin could determine whether a man enjoyed comfort or risked hunger in the days ahead. Class differences were evident, even within shared walls, as merchants boasted of trade while laborers concealed their struggles. The tavern became a symbolic space where ordinary people confronted the imbalance between effort and reward. Within these walls, the economic burdens of medieval society became clearly visible, exposing the limited opportunities available to most citizens. Workers and travelers alike gathered around uneven tables, sharing tales of failed harvests, dangerous roads, and unpredictable markets. The tavern transformed into a communal forum where individuals expressed frustration, sought reassurance, and searched for new prospects. Yet beneath the laughter and ale was a quiet awareness that their circumstances could deteriorate with a single misfortune. This environment highlighted the precarious nature of medieval livelihood, where survival depended on chance as much as labor. In Tea Sensei, the tavern documented the human cost of a world defined by scarcity. Despite its rough conditions, the tavern offered psychological escape, allowing individuals to momentarily forget the burdens that awaited them at dawn. The companionship found here softened the weight of daily struggles, even if it could not solve them. Patrons found comfort in shared hardship, recognizing that their anxieties were not borne alone. The tavern thus revealed the tension between temporary pleasure and long-term consequence, showing how people sought refuge in community, even when it risked their limited resources. In the end, it stood as more than a place to drink it, reflected the resilience, fear, and endurance of those navigating a harsh and unforgiving era. The first impression upon entering a medieval tavern was not visual, but sensory, defined by an overwhelming mixture of smoke, sweat, and damp earth. Its floors absorbed years of spills and footsteps, transforming into dark, uneven surfaces that reflected the chaotic nature of tavern life. Compared to modern standards of cleanliness, these establishments symbolized an age in which hygiene was limited and survival needs outweighed comfort. Patrons accepted these conditions because there were few alternatives outside the home or marketplace. This willingness to endure discomfort reflected broader societal expectations around labor, scarcity, and endurance. Tavern. A sensory assault was therefore not merely a detail, but a reminder of the physical hardship embedded in everyday existence. In this confined environment, the architecture itself became a narrative of class and necessity. Rough timber beams, soot-covered ceilings, and tightly packed benches were built for function rather than luxury. There was no separation between social groups beyond status and coin, forcing merchants, soldiers, and peasants into close proximity. This lack of privacy amplified conflict, gossip, and negotiation, giving taverns a dual identity as both battleground and marketplace. Noise and smoke created an atmosphere where order was fragile and temporary, mirroring the instability of economic life outside the tavern walls. Ultimately, the physical structure reinforced the social dynamics that shaped every interaction. The tavern's atmosphere served as a living document of economic inequality and aspiration. People sought relief through ale, not simply for pleasure, but as a coping mechanism in a world where exhaustion was constant. The dim lighting and crowded space fostered both camaraderie and suspicion, encouraging alliances and disputes in equal measure. What appeared chaotic was, in reality, a reflection of deeper societal truths. Opportunity was scarce, risk was common, and community was often the only defense against hardship. In this sense, the tavern became a microcosm of the medieval struggle for stability and dignity. Unlike modern establishments, medieval taverns served multiple functions beyond dining and drink. They operated as informal hiring halls where travelers sought employment, wages, or protection. Merchants discussed trade routes and fluctuating prices, while laborers searched for seasonal work or negotiated debts. These exchanges revealed how survival depended on social networks and negotiation rather than fixed wages or stable employment. The tavern therefore functioned as an economic engine for the working class, generating opportunity and conflict simultaneously. Its walls echoed with ambition, fear, and calculation. Such interactions exposed the vulnerability of the medieval workforce, where contracts were verbal and loyalty was conditional. Those seeking better futures often discovered that opportunity required risk, both financial and physical. Failed negotiations could result in long journeys home, unpaid labor, or dangerous promises made in desperation. The lack of institutional protection meant that even honest workers could be exploited by those with greater power or resources. In this sense, the tavern magnified the consequences of inequality and highlighted the precarious nature of ambition. It was a place where a single conversation could change a life or ruin one. Despite these risks, individuals continued to gather in taverns because the chance of advancement outweighed the threat of disappointment. The potential for new connections offered hope, even when outcomes were uncertain. This dynamic illustrated a recurring truth of human history. People accept risk when the alternative is stagnation or poverty. The medieval tavern thus symbolizes the universal struggle for economic security in a world without guarantee. Its legacy remains relevant, echoing modern challenges of unstable work and unequal opportunity. Social class in the medieval tavern was visible yet fluid. Unlike the rigid hierarchies outside its doors, knights and merchants might drink beside craftsmen or farmers, sharing space, even if not status. Wealth influenced comfort, better drink, safer seating, but it did not guarantee respect or safety. The tavern exposed how power could shift quickly when anger, alcohol, or desperation overcame social restraint. This environment allowed momentary equality and sudden conflict in the same breath. It demonstrated how fragile social order truly was. Conflict often arose when class expectations collided with harsh realities. A wealthy traveler displaying coin could attract admiration or resentment, leading to negotiation or violence. Poorer patrons, emboldened by drink or frustration, challenged authority or sought validation through confrontation. These interactions revealed the psychological burden of inequality, where dignity and pride were defended fiercely, despite economic limitations. The tavern was not merely a social space, it was a stage where identity was tested. Such dynamics highlight the emotional consequences of class-based societies. Yet even amid conflict, shared hardship created unexpected alliances. Patrons recognized that survival required cooperation at times and rivalry at others. The tavern became a proving ground for character, revealing strengths and vulnerabilities unseen in daily labor. In this unpredictable setting, individuals confronted the tension between self-preservation and social belonging. The result was a complex environment where power, pride, and necessity shaped every encounter. The role of the tavern keeper was central to maintaining order in an inherently unstable environment. He acted as mediator, disciplinarian, and entrepreneur, balancing profit with control. His livelihood depended on attracting customers while minimizing risk, forcing difficult decisions about who to serve, trust, or remove. Tavern keepers exploited opportunities where possible, but also managed disputes to avoid costly damage or intervention from authorities. Their leadership revealed the hidden labor required to manage a space defined by volatility. Control was an ongoing struggle rather than a guarantee. The tavern keeper's authority reflected broader themes of power and consequence. Decisions about credit, service, and punishment shaped reputations and alliances. A lenient policy toward gambling or violence might attract business, but invite trouble. Conversely, strict enforcement could create resentment while preserving order. These choices mirrored the complex balance between personal gain and community stability challenge. Familiar across history, the tavern keeper's success required insight, resilience, and calculated risk. Despite this authority, the tavern keeper faced vulnerabilities of his own. Debt, corruption, and external pressure could undermine his control. He navigated relationships with officials, merchants, and criminals, each carrying opportunity and danger. The tavern thus illustrated how leadership demanded compromise and constant vigilance. It showed that power was rarely absolute, and survival required adaptation rather than dominance. Alcohol in the medieval taverns served a purpose beyond leisure, functioning as a necessity in a world where clean water was scarce. Brewing made water safer to drink, turning ale into a practical solution rather than a luxury. Patrons consumed it daily, regardless of social class, as survival made sobriety secondary. This reliance on alcohol altered behavior, encouraging risk-taking, loosening restraint, and intensifying conflicts. The tavern environment magnified these effects, making judgment more fragile and consequences more severe. The dependence on ale uncovered deeper vulnerabilities within medieval society, where basic needs dictated behavior. Despite its necessity, alcohol created significant challenges for public order and personal responsibility. Taverns operated at the intersection of survival and indulgence, where individuals sought both relief and escape. Heavy consumption impaired reasoning, heightening the likelihood of disputes, reckless gambling, or impulsive decisions. These outcomes demonstrated how resource scarcity shaped social conduct and exposed individuals to avoidable dangers. In this way, alcohol was both a solution and a catalyst for social turmoil. Its dual function reflected the paradox of necessity in an imperfect world. The cultural normalization of ale-shaped identity and expectation. Drinking was seen as communal and essential, not immoral or excessive. Social bonding, negotiation, and celebration all occurred around shared drink, reinforcing its role in shaping relationships. At the same time, dependence on ale revealed a population living with constant hardship, seeking relief wherever possible. The tavern made visible the link between survival and escapism, illustrating how basic needs influenced both personal choices and collective behavior. Food in medieval taverns reflected scarcity and improvisation more than culinary tradition. Ingredients were determined by availability, affordability, and preservation challenges. Pottage, a constantly simmering stew, embodied both resilience and risk, blending fresh and questionable ingredients alike. Bread served as staple and utensil, symbolizing nutrition through necessity rather than quality. The unpredictability of meals mirrored the instability of medieval life, where hunger, disease, and limited resources shaped daily experience. Eating in a tavern was less about taste and more about survival. These meals exposed a stark divide between expectation and reality. Travelers might hope for comfort after long journeys, but face meals that were heavy, coarse, and potentially unsafe. Wealth could buy better cuts or fresher ingredients, but even privilege had limits in an era without refrigeration or modern hygiene. The shared table dramatized inequality, where the poor consumed scraps while the wealthy negotiated choice. Food not only filled stomachs, but reinforced social hierarchy. Hunger made compromise unavoidable. Yet tavern meals offered something intangible, temporary relief from hardship. A hot meal restored strength for labor, travel, or trade. Shared food encouraged social interaction, fostering unity even among strangers. For many, the tavern meal was a rare opportunity for warmth and social belonging. This blend of discomfort and comfort reflected medieval resilience, demonstrating how individuals sought dignity within the constraints of their circumstances. Violence was not incidental to tavern life, but embedded in its culture. The close quarters, alcohol consumption, and social mixing created an environment where disputes escalated quickly. Honor, pride, and reputation were contested through physical confrontation, often without intervention. Weapons ranged from knives to improvised tools, turning everyday objects into instruments of conflict. Violence shaped social hierarchies, determining who commanded respect and who endured humiliation. In this way, the tavern became an arena where physical strength influenced status. The consequences of violence extended beyond immediate injury. Legal repercussions were inconsistent, influenced by social status, wealth, and local politics. Victims might suffer long-term disability or death, while aggressors could face revenge from families or allies. These risks demonstrated the fragility of both justice and safety in medieval society. Violence also disrupted economic stability, harming patrons' livelihoods and tavern profits alike. Conflict was rarely isolated. Its effects echoed outward. Despite these dangers, violence persisted because it reinforced cultural values. In a world with limited legal protection, individuals defended honor. Fighting restored pride or deterred future challenges. The tavern, therefore, reflected a belief system in which physical confrontation was rational within social norms. This reality underscores how cultural frameworks shape behavior in environments defined by scarcity and uncertainty. Gambling represented hope and desperation in equal measure. Dice games, card play, and contests of skill provided opportunities to win coin quickly in a world with limited mobility. Patrons risked savings, wages, or possessions in pursuit of financial relief. These wagers exposed emotional vulnerability as players balanced ambition against fear of loss. The tavern offered a rare chance to test ability or fortune, but rewards were uncertain and often fleeting. Gambling turned risk into ritual. The psychological appeal of gambling reflected broader instability in medieval life. Unpredictable harvests, illness, and war made planning difficult, leading individuals to seek control through chance. Winning validated skill or luck, while losing reinforced feelings of powerlessness. This emotional cycle drove repeated participation despite negative outcomes. Gambling thus mirrored the tension between hope and hardship, illustrating how unpredictability shaped At its core, gambling revealed the interplay between opportunity and consequence. Small victories could transform circumstances temporarily, encouraging continued risk. Large losses could destroy livelihoods, leading to debt, theft, or violence. The tavern became a catalyst for both ambition and ruin, demonstrating how fragile financial security was in a world without safety nets. Gambling symbolized the human struggle to overcome limitation through risk. Law enforcement in taverns operated within ambiguity rather than order. Official constables and agents attempted to regulate gambling, violence, and illicit trade, but authority was inconsistent. Corruption, bribery, and political influence shaped enforcement more than written law. Tavern keepers negotiated with officials to avoid closure or penalties, accepting informal arrangements to continue operation. The legal system exposed the tension between regulation and necessity. Local realities shaped justice more than ideals. Authority within taverns often shifted between official and unofficial control. Regular patrons, influential figures, or criminal networks could enforce their own rules. These informal systems maintained order when official intervention was slow or unwelcome. However, they also enabled exploitation, favoritism, and intimidation. The tavern thus illustrated how power functioned in layered forms, with law serving as both tool and weapon. Justice depended on who wielded influence. This environment demonstrated the limits of medieval governance. Institutions struggled to regulate spaces where necessity, survival, and profit converged. Enforcement reflected economic realities rather than social ideals, revealing a world where authority was negotiated rather than absolute. The tavern became a stage where legal, economic, and social forces collided, shaping outcomes through compromise and conflict. The economic role of taverns extended beyond simple commerce, acting as hubs for trade, negotiation, and informal credit. Merchants used these spaces to establish agreements, secure supplies, and evaluate potential partners. Deals were sealed not through contracts, but reputation, making personal credibility a form of currency. Tavern keepers functioned as intermediaries, facilitating introductions and providing information networks. These interactions revealed how commerce depended on trust and proximity rather than formal institutions. The tavern economy illustrated how survival required flexibility and negotiation. For common laborers, taverns symbolized access to opportunity, however limited. Work arrangements for transport, construction, or agriculture were often negotiated in these crowded rooms. Employers sought cheap labor, while workers sought reliable wages, creating uneasy relationships shaped by desperation. Economic mobility was constrained by social hierarchy, but informal agreements offered incremental advancement. The tavern served as a marketplace of ambition and necessity where individuals navigated financial uncertainty. Its economic function thus extended into every social stratum. The economic complexity of taverns exposed contradictions within medieval society. They supported livelihoods yet enabled exploitation. They fostered trade while encouraging risky debts and reckless gambling. The same environment that created opportunity also magnified financial vulnerability. This paradox illustrated how economic survival required compromise and resilience. The tavern's economy was both a lifeline and a trap. Disease within taverns reflected the harsh realities of medieval public health. Overcrowding, poor ventilation, and inadequate sanitation created conditions ripe for contagion. Fleas, lice, and rodents thrived in shared bedding and straw-covered floors. Illness spread rapidly through shared food, cups, and close contact. With limited medical understanding, infections were attributed to superstition rather than hygiene. Taverns thus became inadvertent incubators of disease. The medical responses available were rudimentary and inconsistent. Herbal remedies, bloodletting, and prayer were common treatments, though often ineffective. Physicians were scarce and expensive, leaving most people dependent on folk knowledge. Recovery depended more on luck and constitution than expertise. Chronic illness affected productivity, deepening economic hardship. Disease revealed the vulnerability of a society without scientific health care. Despite these hazards, taverns remained central to daily life because alternatives were limited. Private homes lacked resources for hospitality, and public spaces were scarce. Travelers, laborers, and merchants accepted risk as unavoidable. Disease shaped tavern culture by influencing behavior, superstition, and coping mechanisms. This reality showed how survival required endurance in the face of persistent danger. Taverns embodied the intersection of necessity and vulnerability. Alcohol dependency emerged gradually within tavern culture as individuals relied on ale for relief and social belonging. Routine consumption blurred the line between necessity and addiction. Patrons used drink to suppress stress, numb hardship, or escape overwhelming responsibility. Regular intoxication became normalized, masking deeper psychological struggles. Addiction eroded financial stability and personal relationships. Dependence reflected broader societal pressures rather than isolated weakness. The consequences of dependency extended beyond individuals. Families suffered from lost income, unpaid debts, and emotional absence. Communities struggled with disruption, violence, and poverty tied to habitual drinking. Tavern keepers profited from consumption, yet bore responsibility for maintaining order among impaired customers. The social cost of dependency revealed structural failures in support and opportunity. Alcohol obscured hardship rather than solving it. Despite the damage, dependency persisted because alternatives were scarce. With limited leisure, scarce comfort, and few coping strategies, drink became a refuge. The psychological relief offered was immediate, while consequences were delayed. This dynamic sustained addiction across generations. Tavern culture illustrated how economic scarcity and emotional strain fostered harmful coping mechanisms. Dependency was a symptom of unmet needs. The social hierarchy inside taverns was fluid yet unmistakable. Nobles, merchants, and laborers occupied the same rooms, but not the same status. Seating arrangements, serving priority, and pricing reinforced social distinction. Wealth dictated treatment, while poverty invited suspicion. Despite shared space, stratification remained deeply embedded. Taverns reflected social order, rather than erasing it. Interactions across class lines were cautious and strategic. Lower-status individuals deferred to higher patrons, seeking favor or opportunity. Negotiations required careful language to avoid offense. Social mobility was possible but rare, contingent on luck or patronage. Conflict often arose when boundaries were crossed. These dynamics highlighted the fragility of class relations. The tavern thus became a miniature society where class tensions played out visibly. Cooperation and conflict coexisted in the same environment. Economic ambition and social aspiration shaped behavior. Hierarchy persisted despite shared hardship. Social order influenced every transaction and conversation. The tavern illustrated power embedded in daily life. Women in taverns navigated an environment defined by opportunity and peril. Their labor as servers, cooks, or innkeepers provided income otherwise inaccessible, yet their visibility increased exposure to harassment, exploitation, and judgment. Female authority was often informal, exercised through negotiation, vigilance, and resilience. Economic necessity forced difficult choices. Gender shaped experience in profound ways. Women in managerial roles balanced hospitality with enforcement. They protected profits, managed disputes, and enforced unwritten rules. Their authority rested on respect rather than legal power. This precarious position required strength and adaptability. Failure risked violence, economic ruin, or social condemnation. Success required navigating danger with strategy and resolve. Women without institutional support faced limited protection. Their economic contributions were undervalued, and their labor was associated with morality rather than skill. Yet their presence sustained tavern operations and community life. Gender roles reflected the constraints and expectations of medieval society. Women bore disproportionate risk for equal participation. Their experiences illustrated inequality within necessity. Taverns served as centers of information exchange, surpassing official institutions in reach and relevance. Travelers shared news of trade routes, disease, war, and politics. Merchants gathered intelligence on market conditions and competition. Local gossip exposed social tensions, alliances, and grievances. Information flowed freely, shaping decisions and perceptions. In a world without mass communication, taverns were crucial networks. The reliability of information varied widely. Rumors mingled with fact, influenced by personal bias or hidden agendas. Skilled listeners distinguished credibility through intuition and experience. Misinterpretation could lead to conflict, panic, or ill-informed decisions. Knowledge became a tool for advantage or manipulation. The tavern reflected how information shaped power. This informal communication system revealed society's dependence on oral exchange. Literacy was rare, and written records limited. The tavern bridged gaps in official communication. It provided access to knowledge otherwise unavailable. Its role demonstrated the importance of social interaction in sustaining community function. Taverns served as medieval information hubs. Hospitality in taverns was shaped by economic motives rather than altruism. Accommodation ranged from shared beds to overcrowded floors. Comfort was secondary to capacity, and safety was not guaranteed. Travelers accepted these conditions due to scarcity of alternatives. Hospitality reflected transactional relationships, not generosity. Profit guided decisions more than comfort. Shared spaces created tension and vulnerability. Theft, conflict, and illness were common in communal sleeping arrangements. Privacy was non-existent, and safety unpredictable. Social norms dictated behavior more than rules. Guests navigated risk through caution and cooperation. Hospitality was a negotiation rather than a service. Despite these conditions, taverns fulfilled essential needs. They provided shelter from weather, danger, and uncertainty. Travelers accessed food, warmth, and companionship otherwise unavailable. Hospitality reflected the limitations of infrastructure and the demands of survival. The tavern filled gaps in public service. It symbolized a society prioritizing function over comfort. Crime within taverns thrived due to opportunity, anonymity, and desperation. Pickpockets targeted merchants, gamblers, and drunk patrons. Forgers, fences, and smugglers used taverns as meeting points. Illegal trade flourished under the guise of hospitality. Crime reflected systemic poverty and limited enforcement. Taverns became microcosms of broader instability. Criminal networks exploited tavern dynamics to their advantage. They observed behavior, identified targets, and coordinated operations. Informal alliances protected illicit activities. Tavern keepers tolerated or benefited from criminal presence. This complicity sustained underground economies. Crime intertwined with legitimate commerce. The prevalence of crime revealed deeper failures in governance and social welfare. Lack of opportunity pushed individuals toward theft or violence. Legal systems struggled to regulate informal environments. Punishment was inconsistent, creating incentives for repeat offenses. Crime reflected survival strategies rather than moral decay. Taverns exposed the consequences of unmet needs. Religion intersected with tavern culture in paradoxical ways. The church condemned excess, immorality, and violence, yet clergy frequented taverns. Religious festivals increased business, contributing to indulgence and celebration. Confession offered absolution without addressing systemic issues. The tension between faith and practice revealed moral contradiction. Taverns reflected the complexity of belief in daily life. Religious influence shaped perceptions of sin, virtue, and redemption. Patrons viewed behavior through cultural and spiritual lenses. Guilt and absolution formed emotional cycles tied to tavern activities. Clergy wielded authority but participated in the very practices they criticized. This duality illustrated institutional limitations. Religion both guided and excused conduct. The presence of religion highlighted the struggle between idealism and reality. Moral instruction clashed with necessity, revealing the gap between doctrine and survival. Taverns offered comfort absent in religious institutions. Faith became personal rather than institutional. Religion shaped but could not control behavior. Taverns illustrated lived spirituality rather than prescribed morality. Reputation functioned as currency within tavern communities. Patrons valued trustworthiness, strength, and reliability. Social standing influenced treatment, opportunity, and risk. A reputation for honesty facilitated trade, while one for violence deterred conflict. Reputation shaped interaction more than wealth alone. The tavern magnified reputational stakes. Loss of reputation had severe consequences. Individuals faced isolation, hostility, or exploitation. Recovery required consistent behavior or strategic alliances. Social memory extended beyond immediate events. Reputation could determine economic and personal survival. Its fragility reflected the weight of communal judgment. Reputation reinforced community norms in the absence of formal regulation. It punished deceit, rewarded loyalty, and encouraged caution. Informal accountability replaced institutional authority. This system maintained order while allowing flexibility. Reputation became both protection and vulnerability. Taverns revealed social control rooted in perception. Taverns shaped local economies through tax revenue, employment, and supply chains. Brewers, bakers, farmers, and craftsmen depended on tavern demand. Supply shortages disrupted local markets, creating ripple effects. Tavern success influenced prices, labor, and resource allocation. Economic stability hinged on tavern viability. The establishment was integral to regional commerce. Economic dependence increased vulnerability during crises. War, famine, or disease-reduced patronage. Tavern closures triggered unemployment and reduced trade. Communities experienced financial strain beyond individual businesses. The interdependence highlighted economic fragility. Survival required resilience and adaptation. Taverns demonstrated how informal institutions underpinned medieval economies. They bridged gaps left by formal markets. They supported livelihoods across class boundaries. Their success reflected collective need rather than luxury. Economic analysis revealed taverns as foundational, not peripheral. The establishment shaped local prosperity. Migration and mobility increased tavern significance as transient populations sought refuge. Travelers from distant regions brought diverse customs, languages, and expectations. Taverns mediated cultural exchange while amplifying misunderstanding. Integration required tolerance and negotiation. Mobility challenged established norms. Taverns reflected cultural intersection. These transient relationships influenced trade, politics, and social identity. New alliances formed through shared experience or necessity. Miscommunication created conflict or opportunity. Cultural blending reshaped food, drink, and entertainment. Diversity enriched and complicated tavern life. Interaction shaped evolving norms. Mobility exposed tensions between local identity and foreign influence. Suspicion and curiosity coexisted. Economic benefit contrasted with cultural anxiety. Taverns revealed how societies responded to change. They mirrored both acceptance and resistance. Migration highlighted adaptive pressures. Conflict resolution in taverns relied on informal mediation rather than structured justice. Tavern keepers negotiated disputes to preserve business. Patrons intervened to protect alliances or reputations. Compensation, apology, or temporary banishment resolved conflict. Violence was a last resort but a constant threat. Resolution reflected pragmatic necessity. Informal justice systems maintained order where official authority was limited. Solutions prioritized restoration over punishment. Efficiency outweighed fairness. These frameworks reinforced existing hierarchies. Power shaped outcomes more than principle. Justice mirrored social structure. The tavern illustrated how communities self-regulated under constraint. Conflict management reflected collective interest. Stability required compromise and shared norms. Informal justice maintained function despite imperfection. These systems revealed resilience within limitation. Taverns demonstrated adaptive governance. Seasonal rhythms influenced tavern activity and economic fluctuation. Harvests increased patronage, celebration, and spending. Winter reduced travel, creating scarcity and tension. Religious festivals generated business and conflict. Seasonal patterns shaped risk and opportunity. The tavern's fortunes ebbed and flowed predictably. Seasonality influenced food supply, drink quality, and pricing. Scarcity heightened desperation, while abundance fostered indulgence. Weather affected travel, trade, and mobility. Disease followed seasonal patterns, altering crowd behavior. These dynamics shaped daily operations. Seasonal cycles dictated tavern life. The tavern adapted through resource management and strategic decisions. Successful keepers anticipated fluctuations. Preparation reduced vulnerability. Seasonal knowledge became economic advantage. These adaptations demonstrated resilience. The tavern survived by aligning with natural cycles. The psychological environment of taverns shaped behavior and identity. Crowded rooms intensified emotion, reducing inhibition and enhancing conflict. Alcohol lowered restraint, amplifying aggression or vulnerability. Social pressure dictated conformity or rebellion. The tavern altered perception and judgment. Environment influenced decision. Chronic exposure to tension affected mental health. Anxiety, depression, and trauma emerged from violence, addiction, and instability. Coping strategies relied on avoidance rather than healing. Social stigma prevented acknowledgement of emotional distress. Psychological suffering persisted without support. Mental health challenges reflected social conditions. Despite hardship, taverns offered moments of relief and camaraderie. Shared experiences fostered belonging. Humor, music, and storytelling provided distraction. Temporary joy contrasted with long-term struggle. These contradictions define tavern emotional culture. The environment shaped resilience and fragility. Children and adolescents in tavern environments learned social norms early. Exposure to vice, labor, and conflict-shaped identity. Many worked as servants, apprentices, or helpers. Economic necessity forced participation in adult spaces. Childhood innocence was rare. Socialization occurred under pressure. Youth involvement highlighted limited options for advancement. Education was inaccessible, and labor demanded immediate contribution. Taverns offered employment, but risked exploitation. Skills learned ranged from negotiation to deception. Opportunity mingled with danger. Youth absorbed adult behaviors prematurely. Generational cycles perpetuated hardship. Children of tavern workers often inherited profession or poverty. Limited mobility reinforced inequality. Social structures discouraged transformation. These patterns reflected systemic constraints. Taverns demonstrated intergenerational continuity. War influenced tavern culture by shifting population, economy, and behavior. Soldiers increased demand for drink, lodging, and entertainment. Conflict disrupted trade routes, reducing supply and increasing prices. Veterans brought trauma, aggression, and instability. Political tension heightened suspicion and division. War altered tavern dynamics profoundly. Taverns served as recruitment centers and intelligence hubs. Military officials monitored travelers and rumors. Soldiers negotiated pay, alliances, and disputes. Alcohol intensified volatility. War permeated daily life. Taverns bridged civilian and military spheres. Peace did not guarantee stability. Economic strain persisted, and trauma lingered. Rebuilding required cooperation across social groups. Taverns facilitated exchange, negotiation, and adaptation. Their role extended beyond conflict. War demonstrated taverns as social barometers. Urban and rural taverns differed significantly in structure, clientele, and function. City taverns attracted diverse populations, commerce, and crime. Rural establishments served local communities with limited resources. Urban taverns offered anonymity. Rural taverns enforced familiarity. These contrasts shaped experience and risk. Urban taverns were centers of trade, politics, and exploitation. Wealth created opportunity and danger. Crime flourished alongside business. Rural taverns reinforced social cohesion but limited mobility. Isolation reduced diversity but increased interdependence. Geography shaped culture despite differences. Both environments shared core functions. They provided shelter, food, and communication. They mediated social conflict and economic exchange. They reflected local pressures and resources. Taverns adapted to context. Their role was universal, yet varied. The decline of medieval taverns reflected broader societal improvements in sanitation, governance, and infrastructure reduced dependence on informal hospitality. New institutions emerged, replacing taverns' central role. Commerce shifted toward regulated markets. Travel and communication modernized. The tavern era faded gradually. Cultural memory romanticized taverns, obscuring hardship. Literature emphasized adventure and camaraderie, while ignoring disease and violence. Modern perceptions reflect selective nostalgia. The reality was more complex and contradictory. Taverns were symbols of resilience, not fantasy. Memory shaped interpretation. Their legacy persisted through modern pubs, inns, and social establishments. Contemporary hospitality evolved from medieval foundations. Community, commerce, and companionship remain central. The tavern's influence extended beyond architecture. It shaped social expectations. Its decline marked transformation, not disappearance. The medieval tavern encapsulated the tension between necessity and consequence. It provided shelter, commerce, and connection in a world defined by scarcity. Yet it also magnified hardship through violence, addiction, and exploitation. Taverns exposed the fragility of social structures and the resilience of human adaptability. They reflected the struggle for survival within limited opportunity. Their history reveals the complexity of everyday life. The tavern's contradictions illustrate the duality of human behavior. Compassion and cruelty coexisted in shared spaces. Economic ambition intersected with moral compromise. Community formed under pressure, revealing both cooperation and conflict. These dynamics shaped medieval society as profoundly as warfare or religion. The tavern remains a lens for understanding human nature. Though the medieval tavern is gone, its legacy survives in modern social spaces. It reminds us that progress emerges from imperfection. It demonstrates how ordinary institutions influence culture, economy, and identity. It reveals how people adapt within constraint, seeking dignity and connection. It shows history through everyday struggle rather than grand narrative. If this documentary opened your eyes, subscribe and tell us which forgotten chapter of history we should uncover next.